The Leviathan was a large cargo ship, the biggest Tai San had ever been on in her many travels since becoming a slave and being transported from one place to another. But the ship was dwarfed by the size of the port it had docked in. In the time of the adults, this must have been a busy shipping route, Tai San judged, imagining the hustle and bustle of international trade in its heyday. Her eyes scanned the vicinity, seeing if she could recognize any signs or landmarks, something to show which port in the world they might be in. Around them stood row upon row of cargo containers, stacked high in uneven lines of walls, imprecisely placed, like a child's building blocks, as if they might tumble over. Giant cranes towered higher still, immobile, frozen in time, rusting hulks of junk, but also monuments to the old days that had once been, a past civilization that was no more. They were standing on the large concrete pad of the dockside like ants beside the ship that had carried them there. Nature seemed to be reclaiming the land, with plant life forcing its way through the various cracks in the foundations. Tai San was beside the broker, the two of them surrounded protectively by his forces. The guards had weapons poised, primed for action, as they scanned the periphery of the port in a state of alert. For all the time they had spent together over many months, Tai San had never truly gotten to know the broker. Where he had tried to find out everything about her, she had been unable to find out anything about him, apart from his blatant cruel streak and matter-of-fact ruthless efficiency in carrying out his actions. But, to her surprise, Tai San could now sense a vulnerability in the broker, or more precisely, fear. His eyes darted furtively back and forth, surveying the scene. Beads of sweat were on his brow, and he cleared his throat from time to time to relieve the tension within. Tai San wondered what it could be that was making him and his forces so on edge, and how whatever or whoever was affecting them so much could impact her. Perhaps it was the fact that the only cargo that had been on board appeared to be Tai San, the broker, and his guards. The Leviathan's cargo doors were open, and its enormous hold revealed nothing but a cavernous emptiness, echoing the footsteps of some of the broker's forces who moved around inside the ship. Had there been a mistake in the delivery? Had the entire voyage been to no avail? Was this the karma that the broker deserved? Had someone double-crossed him? Tai San was surprised to hear another sound further away, the sound of distant laughter, childish giggling. The broker's guards defensively aimed their weapons at the source of the sound. A group of very young children were scampering in the waters lapping into the harbor, searching through flotsam and jetsam that had washed ashore. It was like a sea of debris from the adult times. The banks of the harbor awash in a tide of rubbish, plastic bottles, garbage bags. Rotten fish decayed at the surface. The waters filthy, thick with mud, grime. The children looked feral in their barely fitting, ragged clothes, were covered in sores, flies buzzing around them, and had visible cuts and bruises. Tai San was shocked, repulsed by the sight. Whatever land she was now in, she quickly realized that there were strays, just as there were in her own land, those not members or under the protection of any tribe. It was pitiful. Suddenly, the loud sound of engines rumbled into the port. The weight of the vehicles vibrating and almost shaking the very ground itself.
Finally.
The broker exhaled nervously to himself as he gazed ahead at a fleet of long-haul transport trucks approaching. followed by a convoy of other vehicles which looked strangely futuristic to Tai San. The impoverished young children stopped their playing and instead ran for cover, nervously ducking behind the debris washed up around them. They appeared to be panic-stricken. From the broker and guard's uneasy demeanor, Tai San wondered what was about to occur. But it was soon clear that the newcomers who had driven into the port weren't there for a fight. They were there to trade. The Leviathan was quickly loaded with all manner of goods, the delivery trucks driving right up to the cargo hold so that the items they had carried could be placed inside. There were domestic household appliances, a sports car from the adult days, its polished chrome glistening in the sun, but of little value in the new world, with clean water more of a sought-after commodity, as evidenced now with several containers being loaded, along with cattle being led inside the hold. But mostly there was agricultural food. A mountain of grain was accumulating in the vessel as workers carried buckets full to the brim, dumping out the contents, piling it further, higher. A smaller heap of rice was growing in size in the middle of the ship as it too was unloaded from the trucks. All of this produce and selection of goods were being exchanged for the one thing that the broker had brought to these shores after the long voyage of many miles. It was Tai San herself. To her shock, she was being traded again and couldn't believe her worth or value was ever measured in so much food. It could feed so many people for so long. What had she ever done to become such a commodity of equal value? Who were these people, the ones giving so much so they could take possession of her? What did they want from her? While the workers continued loading the ship, an advanced party from the futuristic vehicles arrived. They were dressed in protective decontamination suits. Some of the entourage wore strange medical masks and plastic gloves. And they were being very careful of Tai San, treating her gently, like a prized possession, as they started to examine her, monitoring different aspects, determining her status. None of them had asked permission, even spoken to Tai San to inquire how she might feel about proceedings. She had got accustomed to being treated as an object rather than a person in her many dealings as a slave, but still felt a sense of shame. Indignity in the way in which she was being examined like a laboratory specimen without having any say in the matter. There was nothing she could do to stop them, though, she realized, and all she could do was try and keep her integrity intact as best as she could, not show emotion, any sign of weakness that her new masters could exploit. She wouldn't give them that. It was a humiliating ordeal, inhuman, invasive, taking away her rights. They, whoever they were, seemingly had control of even her own body, but she would never allow them to possess her spirit. Her height and weight were recorded, her temperature taken, pulse, some blood tests conducted, her body measurements taken, her oral hygiene was checked, teeth probed one by one, details recorded in a tablet computer. Her hair and scalp were painstakingly examined, presumably for lice or some other form of infestation, perhaps disease of some kind. A piece of equipment Tai San never even knew existed was put against her eyes, and a wisp of cloud squirted closely onto the surface, making her eyes water as the machine somehow read her retina, making a recording of the details of her very eyes. And through her haze, Tai San couldn't help but notice an image of herself appearing on all of the tablet screens, matching the very same photograph the broker had in his possession when she first encountered him. and she surmised that this exercise was probably some official confirmation of not only facial recognition, but identity. Tai San closed her eyes, slowed her breath, deep in meditation in an effort to stay calm. Imagining she was in another place, back at her home in the mall with her beloved tribe, as the medical scientific unit performed more sets of blood tests, finally injecting needles painfully into Tai San's arms, forced outstretched by some of the broker's guards. Tai San wondered if she was being somehow immunized against something. The only question was, what? The unit examined the monitors of their machines and tablet computers, punched in data, and left, passing a stranger who emerged from a vehicle at the head of the convoy. Tai San was quickly aware that whoever this person was, he was clearly powerful, and she could tell from the respect given in his demeanor by the broker that this new figure had to be of high authority in this land. He was about Tai San's age, tall, exuded confidence, almost bordering on arrogance, as he signed a bill of goods and said somewhat cynically,
"It would appear our transaction is complete. I just hope the enormous value I paid is worth it."
Tai San could sense that there was more than a sexual inference as he cast a glance down her body, looking over her appreciatively. Tai San detecting some lasciviousness in his gaze, as well as pride at having secured her. "Who are you?" Tai San asked cautiously.
"Life and death,"
the stranger replied, amidst a charming smile.
"Do you have her data?"
he asked the broker. The broker nodded and handed over a hard drive.
You'll find all the information and details in this drive, Selector,
the broker said. Tai San listened and watched in growing unease as the apparent selector signed more documents, handing them back to the broker before indicating to the paramilitary guards surrounding him.
"Place the cargo in the vehicle. We need to keep on schedule,"
the selector stated eagerly. "Where are you taking me?" Tai San interrupted.
"To the future and the Creator."
He smiled at some unknown irony in his own comment and responded with more than a hint of menace and veiled threat.
"We all have a long journey ahead."
The motorcade made its way through a range of winding roads across a seemingly endless barren land. In the front and rear of the convoy were military vehicles carrying the militia who had been at the docks. Around Tai San's vehicle, she was flanked by several more on each side. Her vehicle was armor-plated, driverless, and she was its only occupant with no means of escape. The doors were locked from the outside. It was clearly automated without even a steering wheel or pedals. No driving seat or dashboard, controlled and moving as if by an unseen force. The barren landscape looked almost primitive, with no signs of life, as if from the beginning of time. And yet this vehicle was futuristic, and whoever was controlling it had access to advanced technology. Before the darkness descended, and in the times of the old world, artificial intelligence had become more prominent. But this vehicle seemed to be so very far advanced, and Tai San wondered if someone was controlling it remotely from another location, or perhaps from one of the other vehicles in the long convoy, or if her course had already been preordained and planned, programmed by a computer system somewhere, somehow. She had cuts on her hands from the efforts she had initially made to get out of the vehicle. Unable to open the doors, she had bashed her fists against the thick glass of the windows in an attempt to break out in some way, even kicked from her seat, striving to prise a way through, but it was no use. She was being taken somewhere and could do nothing to influence matters. She wouldn't give up, though. If there was a way to escape or alter her fate, she was determined to find it, or at the very least, to try. The selector was transported in a vehicle of the militia at the head of the convoy, and throughout the journey, Tai San felt a continual sense of foreboding as she wondered why he had gone to such efforts to take her into his custody. And above all, who or what was the creator the selector had referred to? Tai San tried to assess how many miles they had traveled, but it was difficult to ascertain. All the terrain looked the same, desolate, barren, harsh, lifeless, apart from their own convoy. She hadn't even seen any wildlife of any kind, not even a single solitary bird since leaving the port, let alone any landmarks. The earth was mostly colored red, making Tai San feel as if she was on a different planet. The wind gusts threw up clouds of dust like red snow covering the vehicles, the windshield wipers working back and forth rhythmically to keep the front screen clear. Some of the road seemed blackened, charred in places, with potholes on the road, its tarmac melted, crumbling. And judging by some mammoth craters, which Tai San noticed, there had been some explosions at some point in time. Huge explosions. Tai San tried somehow to put any notion of a post-apocalyptic event out of her mind, but the thought continued to prevail, especially as she became aware of acres and acres of large animal bones, carcasses of cattle looking like fossils of dinosaurs. Had there been a drought, a famine, a war, some accident? Was it the result of the virus somehow, or something more ominous, sinister? As the journey continued, Tai San spotted sudden warning biohazard signs on the roadside, alerting their viewer to not pass any further. Warning of extreme danger, with any presence being strictly prohibited. Yet the convoy continued relentlessly, paying no heed or notice to whatever threat there had once been, or still could be, Tai San contemplated. A mile or so later, Tai San spotted the first grave. An unmarked grave, the first of many, stood in the emptiness around, quickly becoming row upon row of graves as far as the eye could see on both sides of the road. Endless long lines of gravestones indicating the extreme loss of life that had befallen the region. It was overwhelming and very moving. Tai San could hardly contain her emotions. So upset was she at the suffering and waste, bringing back memories of what had occurred in her own land, which sent a shiver down her spine, recalling the sheer scale of loss. Parents, friends, family, with the very real threat that the human race would become extinct. Tai San had at least one connection with the occupants of this strange and desolate land. The experience of suffering, loss, the memorials to so many who had gone before. It made Tai San angry at the senselessness of it. The virus, or whatever caused these people to die, was something that had to be beaten, Tai San vowed. Somehow, life just had to go on. Not only her own life, but the lives of others. Humanity had to endure, not become extinct. The graves marked a sad tribute and also a stark reminder that everyone's time was limited, that life was precious. Tai San would never forget that. No matter how dire her own situation could be, she was still alive and determined to make her own life count, to honor herself along with all those who perished, to give justice to the gift that life was so it could reach its full potential. Her feelings of fighting back against death itself, or those who stood in the way of life, surged when the graves receded, and finally signs of life began to show in what had been so far an otherwise lifeless land. Grass sprouted up around the roads, becoming fields, rolling hills. A gradual change was taking shape with every passing mile that unfolded. There was life after all, and hope. As the journey continued, the fields evolved into agricultural pastures, plains, cultivated, worked upon by farm workers, probably slaves, Tai San reasoned, tirelessly toiling in the soil, raising crops. Some plowed fields, others sowed seeds, more still harvested some warded crops. The workers didn't even cast a glance at the passing convoy and seemed almost roboticized, paying more attention to images projected on some outbuildings as if advertising some forthcoming event, the Cube, coming soon. Tai San noticed that some of the pastures the convoy passed were full of sheep, cattle, supervised by their herders, who once again paid no attention to the vehicles in the convoy that sped past, which Tai San found strange and unnerving, fueling her uncertainty of what might lay ahead. What was certain, though, was that the area was teeming with life, plant, animal, and human. Such a contrast to what had been the barren landscape, the rows upon rows of graves. She was in a society rebuilding, growing and organized too, compared to whatever destruction had occurred. Now her vehicle made a notification pinging sound from within, which signaled, unbeknownst to Tai San, she had arrived at her next destination. Her journey was over, but in reality had only just begun.
For more information on audio dramatizations, please visit www.tribeworld.com. Keep the dream alive.